Most people see trash. He saw a treasure map. While other kids were playing video games, this 12-year-old Canadian boy was digging through junkyards, and nobody knew he was building his first million-dollar empire, one piece of scrap at a time. Meet Ethan Cole, a 14-year-old boy from a small town outside Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. His dad, Robert Cole, worked double shifts at a factory just to keep the lights on. His mom, Sandra Cole, cleaned offices at night. Ethan had two younger sisters, Lily and Grace, who looked up to him like he was Superman. But back then, Ethan didn't feel like Superman. He felt invisible, a skinny kid in worn-out boots who smelled like motor oil most days. Nobody in his neighborhood thought he'd amount to anything. But sometimes the boy nobody believes in becomes the man everybody studies. What would make a broke teenager spend his weekends inside a dirty junkyard instead of living his youth? 3 blocks from Ethan's house sat Morrison's junkyard, a massive graveyard of rusted cars, broken appliances, and forgotten metal. Most kids avoided it. Ethan was obsessed with it. From age 12, he'd sneak in after school, dragging out copper wire, aluminum cans, and steel scraps in a beat-up red wagon his grandfather had left him. Old man Jim Morrison, the junkyard owner, would watch this kid every day and shake his head. "Boy, what are you going to do with that garbage?" he'd ask. Ethan always answered the same way: make something worth something. That answer would define the next 2 decades of his life. But here's where it gets wild. Jim Morrison ended up being the very first investor in Ethan's business. At 13, Ethan carried his first load of scrap metal to a local recycling depot on his bicycle. Aluminum cans stuffed in garbage bags, copper wire coiled around his handlebars, and a small bag of steel pieces in his backpack. After 2 hours of sorting and weighing, the cashier handed him $47. To most people, 47 is nothing. To Ethan Cole, who had never had money of his own, it was the most powerful feeling he'd ever experienced. He didn't spend a single cent. He put it in a coffee tin under his bed and stared at it every night before sleeping. That 47 wasn't just money, it was proof. What happens when a 13-year-old kid realizes he can turn garbage into gold and decides to go all in? When Robert Cole found out what his son was doing, his first reaction wasn't pride, it was embarrassment. "We're not trash people, Ethan," he said one evening at the dinner table. It stung. But Ethan respected his father too much to argue. Instead, he quietly kept going. Every Saturday morning before his dad woke up, Ethan would be gone, wagon loaded, heading to Morrison's. Weeks later, when Ethan placed $200 in cash on the kitchen table and told his dad it was for groceries, Robert Cole went silent. He looked at the money, looked at his son. And for the first time in years, Robert Cole cried at the dinner table. That moment changed the entire Cole family's direction, and nobody saw what was coming next. Old Jim Morrison didn't just own a junkyard. He had a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Alberta and had worked for a major steel company for 20 years before retiring bitter and broken. When he saw Ethan's discipline and hunger, something woke up inside him. He started teaching Ethan how to identify metal grades, understand scrap market pricing, and sort materials for maximum profit. Jim became the grandfather Ethan never truly had. Every Sunday, Jim would open his books, spread out old industry charts, and turn his rusted office into a classroom. Ethan soaked up every word like a sponge thrown into the ocean. Jim Morrison handed Ethan one piece of paper that would later be worth over $1 million, and it wasn't a check. The piece of paper Jim gave Ethan was a contact list, 14 names of scrap metal dealers, recycling plant managers, and industrial buyers across Alberta that Jim had worked with over 2 decades. "These men respect quality and loyalty," Jim told him. "You give them both, they'll give you a future." Ethan folded that paper and put it inside the same coffee tin as his first 47. At age 15, he began cold calling those contacts, voice cracking, hands sweating, introducing himself as a reliable scrap supplier. 11 of the 14 agreed to take his calls. 3 became long-term buyers before Ethan even turned 16. A 15-year-old kid landing industrial buyers sounds impossible until you hear how he convinced them to trust him. Ethan had nothing. no truck, no warehouse, no business license, but he had one thing nobody could buy: consistency. Every week, without fail, he delivered exactly what he promised: the right metal grades, clean sorted loads on time. He borrowed his neighbor's pickup truck in exchange for mowing lawns. He used his school lunch money to buy basic sorting gloves and tools. His younger sister Lily started helping him sort materials on Friday nights. His mom Sandra would quietly pack them both sandwiches and leave them on the porch without saying a word. The whole Cole family was now quietly building something, without any of them fully realizing it yet. By the time Ethan turned 6, one industrial buyer made him an offer that almost made him quit school entirely. A mid-sized metal processing company in Edmonton called Nortec Metals had been buying from Ethan for months. One afternoon, their purchasing manager Dave Hargrove called Ethan directly and said, "Kid, I don't care how old you are. I want a dedicated weekly supply contract." "Can you handle 2 tons per week?" 2 tons per week. Ethan almost dropped the phone. He had no idea how he'd pull it off. He said yes anyway. That night he sat with Jim Morrison for 4 hours, planning logistics, supply sources, and collection routes. Jim said one thing Ethan never forgot: say yes first, figure it out second. That's how every real business starts. Ethan said yes to 2 tons per week, but his only vehicle was a borrowed pickup truck with a broken tailgate. To fulfill the Nortec contract, Ethan needed volume, storage, and transport, 3 things he didn't have. So he did what most adults wouldn't dare. He went back to Jim Morrison and asked to use a corner of the junkyard as a sorting and storage depot. Jim agreed for a small cut of revenue. Then Ethan recruited 3 friends from school: Marcus, Tyler, and Ben, offering them cash pay per load. He created handwritten route maps, dividing Edmonton's surrounding towns into collection zones. Within 6 weeks, he was pulling in enough scrap to meet the contract. He was 16 years old, managing 3 workers, a supply chain, and an industrial client. This wasn't a hobby anymore. Everything was growing. But one crisis almost destroyed everything Ethan had built before his 17th birthday. At 16 and a half, Ethan's borrowed truck broke down completely during a critical delivery week. His backup plan failed. He missed a delivery to Nortec, first time ever. Dave Hargrove's tone on the phone was cold. "One more miss, and we find another supplier." Ethan didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he showed up at Nortec's facility in person, took a bus for 2 hours, walked into Dave's office uninvited and said, "I'm here to tell you what happened, what I'm doing to fix it, and to guarantee it never happens again." Dave stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "Okay, I respect that." The contract stayed, and Dave became one of Ethan's most powerful long-term allies. Showing up in person saved his contract, but what Ethan did with his next 3,000 changed the entire direction of his company. At 17, Ethan had saved 3,200 from his scrap operations. Every dollar had been earned through freezing Edmonton winters, early mornings and weekends, sacrificed while his classmates partied. With that money, he didn't buy clothes, a gaming console, or a car. He bought a used flatbed trailer and a second-hand hydraulic metal baler, a machine that compresses scrap metal into dense, shippable blocks. It was old, loud, and leaked hydraulic fluid, but it tripled his processing speed and made his loads far more valuable to buyers. His tiny storage corner at Morrison's junkyard now had humming industrial equipment. His friends stopped calling it a side hustle. They started calling it a real business. The baler changed his margins completely, but his biggest competitor was about to come after him in the most unexpected way. Word had spread in Edmonton's recycling community about a teenager undercutting established scrap dealers with cleaner, better sorted loads, a company called Prime Scrap Limited, owned by a veteran dealer named Carl Hutchins, started poaching Ethan's contacts and offering lower prices to lock out his buyers. Carl even approached Jim Morrison with an offer to buy the junkyard. Jim turned him down flat. But 2 of Ethan's industrial buyers switched to Prime Scrap. The loss hit hard. Ethan was 17, facing his first real corporate opponent. Instead of panicking, he sat down with Jim and did a full analysis of everything Prime Scrap was better at, then built a plan to beat them at their own game within 1 year. Ethan's strategy to take on Prime Scrap was so bold that Jim Morrison laughed out loud when he first heard it. Ethan's plan was simple but aggressive: go upstream. Instead of just collecting scrap from junkyards and roadsides, he approached construction companies, demolition crews, and manufacturing plants directly, offering to handle their metal waste removal for free in exchange for keeping the scrap. He printed basic business cards, created a simple one-page service sheet, and spent 3 weeks driving around industrial parks in Jim's old car making cold visits. Within 45 days, he had signed agreements with 6 industrial clients giving him first-right access to their scrap output. His supply chain jumped 400%. Prime Scrap couldn't touch these relationships because Ethan wasn't selling, he was solving a problem for free. By solving a problem for free, Ethan made more money than he ever had, and Carl Hutchins at Prime Scrap finally took notice. When Ethan was 18, Jim Morrison was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. Unable to manage the junkyard anymore, Jim had 2 choices: sell to Prime Scrap or someone else. He chose a third option nobody expected. Jim signed over partial ownership of Morrison's junkyard to Ethan in exchange for a fair monthly income that would support Jim's medical bills and retirement. The legal process took months, but when it was done, Ethan Coe, not yet 19, owned a controlling stake in his first real physical asset: the same junkyard he'd snuck into as a 12-year-old. Jim handed him the keys and said, "Don't change it too fast. Good things take the right kind of time." Ethan framed those words and hung them in his office. With his own junkyard now, Ethan had the infrastructure, but something he discovered inside Jim's old filing cabinet would supercharge everything. Inside Jim's dusty old filing cabinet were decades of scrap pricing records, supplier contacts, buyer histories, and market cycle data dating back to the 1980s. Nobody had looked at these files in years. Ethan spent 2 full weekends reading every single document. He began mapping metal price cycles: when copper peaks, when steel drops, when aluminum is undervalued. He created his own pricing prediction model based on Jim's historical data combined with current market feeds. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him an edge that no competitor in his market had. He started buying large volumes of specific metals when prices were low and holding inventory strategically to sell at peak. It was basic commodities logic, but it worked. Using old paper records and a notebook, Ethan made his first $50,000 profit in a single quarter before his 19th birthday. The night Ethan crossed $100,000 in total business revenue, he didn't celebrate with friends or post on social media. He drove home to the same small house with the crooked front step and placed a simple envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was enough money to pay off 3 months of his parents' bills. His mom, Sandra, opened it while he watched. She covered her mouth with both hands. His dad, Robert, stood in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to hold it together and failing. Lily and Grace didn't fully understand the money, but they understood that their big brother had done something remarkable. That night, the Cole family ate takeout together and talked until midnight. Ethan said it was the best night of his life. That kitchen table moment gave Ethan the fuel for his most ambitious move yet, one that would take him from local dealer to regional empire. At 20, Ethan incorporated his company officially as Cole Recycling Solutions, Inc. He hired his first full-time employee, Marcus, his original school friend. He leased a second yard in a neighboring town and installed proper processing equipment. He built a basic website, got business insurance, and opened a dedicated business bank account. For the first time, this felt like a real company, not a teenager's side operation. He began pursuing municipal contracts, city-level waste metal management deals that would give him stable, massive, recurring supply. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and frustrating. Ethan lost 2 bids before winning his first municipal contract at age 21, worth $180,000 annually. That first government contract opened a door that Ethan didn't even know existed, and behind it was an industry worth billions. Winning the municipal contract forced Ethan to think differently. He was no longer playing in the neighborhood league, he was in the industrial league now. He brought in a business consultant, took a night course in industrial logistics, and started attending scrap metal industry conferences across Canada. At one conference in Toronto, he met Rachel Osei, a sustainability consultant who showed him how the recycling industry was about to be transformed by green energy policies and ESG mandates from major corporations. Companies were now being required to prove responsible metal waste management. Ethan saw exactly where this was going. He pivoted Coal Recycling Solutions to position itself as a certified sustainable metal recycler, one of the first in Alberta to pursue formal green certification. That pivot towards sustainability tripled his corporate client inquiries within 18 months and caught the attention of investors for the first time. At 23, Ethan sat across from a private equity group in Calgary who had heard about Coal Recycling Solutions through a referral from Dave Hargrove, the same Nortec purchasing manager who almost dropped him at 16. The group offered $750,000 in growth capital in exchange for a 25% equity stake. Ethan didn't accept immediately. He took 2 weeks, consulted Jim Morrison, now recovered and sharp as ever, reviewed every clause, and negotiated the equity down to 18%. Then he signed. The investment allowed him to acquire 2 more yards, upgrade all equipment to modern industrial grade, hire a full management team, and launch a formal B2B sales division targeting construction and manufacturing clients across 3 provinces. Coal Recycling Solutions was no longer local. It was regional. With $750,000 in capital and a team behind him, Ethan made one final move that turned a recycling company into a generational empire. Today, Ethan Coal is 28 years old. Coal Recycling Solutions operates 7 yards across Alberta and British Columbia, processes over 40,000 tons of scrap metal annually, and employs 67 full-time workers, many from the same working-class neighborhoods Ethan grew up in. His parents no longer work. His sisters Lily and Grace both have their college tuitions fully paid. Marcus, Tyler, and Ben, his original school crew, all hold management positions in the company. Jim Morrison sits on the company's advisory board. And on Ethan's desk, inside a glass frame, sits a folded piece of paper, Jim's original contact list, and a worn coffee tin with 47 inside. He says those 2 things are the most important objects he owns, because they remind him that empires are not built in boardrooms. They're built in junkyards, at midnight, by people nobody believed in. If a kid from Edmonton could build a recycling empire starting with a red wagon and 47, what excuse do the rest of us have?